By the way, are you fine if we keep it at around 30 to 40 minutes today?
Yeah, of course.
All right. All right, everybody. Hello, everybody. This is Jason, the Hellenic Wolf, and today we have a lovely guest from the Americas. Hello, Graham.
Nice to meet you, Helena Goff.
Nice to meet you too, Barefoot Sprinter. You've been making waves, but before we go into the barefoot stuff, which I'm very interested in, and I'm following that lifestyle, I would love to. We started talking. You basically started philosophizing before I even could say a word, which is amazing. It's very unique for me. Uh, but things that you said, I resonate. Like, especially today. The last thing you said today was like, "Oh man, yeah." Can you talk a little bit about the day to day and the cycles we go through and rent is due every day that you talked about? Can you share a little bit about it?
Yeah, well, it's just waxing philosophically. I mean, I don't know the answers, but it struck me that you asked me what time I wake up, and there's so much push for a morning routine and everything, and it's like we're stuck in this life between the comfort of routine and structure with the excitement of possibility and novelty, and I think there's a certain ratio of those you have to have. But in some capacity, if you do look at things on the whole, you wake up, you have some form of like regularly, whether you just go to the bathroom, sit on the couch and look at your phone, or if you go out, I like to go outside, sit a few minutes barefoot on the ground. There's some morning part, and then there's some work that needs to be done. There's some physical maintenance of your body. There's some acquiring of nutrients, and then maybe there's some play, and you go to bed. And I think if you and this is something I guess eh, maybe it's a moral or a philosophical or a psychological shortcoming on my end, but without some form of compelling, meaningful narrative that shrinks through, meaning that like every day I stack another block and I'm going somewhere, then in some sense you could find a lot of hopeless nihilism in that, like some meaningless. And I think that's if you do think about it, because it really that's like, do you think that there's meaning or not? And if there's a meaning, then what motivates you to get up and do it other than you know assuaging your short term pains? And and maybe that's it. But I think it is just one of those things where like you ask like, when I do this, what time do I wake up? And it's like, well, you know, it's interesting because it's like I wake up and I go and I move my body and kind of connect to things. And right now I'm working on eyesight and training and doing some things with that. But you know, I think that's the value of having a physical practice is that like it does put your body together in some sense. And whether there's a goal or competition that's arbitrarily ascribed, or whether that's some form of more connectedness, it does seem to me that people who are able to live as though there is a narrative seem to be happier, more content, more fulfilled. Whether or not there is any meaningful narrative, truthfully, I think is secondary to the fact that your ability to live as though there is some. That seems to be interesting, but I think because everything really, I mean, the conversation we have around foot health, around training, around sprinting, about anything you do, it's like I think it's all nestled in that because ultimately, if there is no meaning and it's just basically, well, I woke up today and I'm hungry, so I'm going to go like, it's basically life is just getting rid of pain so I could experience the modicum of pleasure that exists in the vacuum of that absence of pain. I think a lot of people, whether or not they realize it, I think that's the default of humanity. I think the intention, or if there is free will, it's to step into the meaning, a self-authored meaning. Whether or not that actually exists, I think it's the ability to step into that, which I don't think other animals have. But if you can't do that, then like, what's the point of training? What's the point of your feet? You would just wear shoes that you'd wear Hokas and orthotics because it just does the job for you. What's the point of doing anything? You just take some pills and just like live in virtual reality. And I think that's an interesting thing. Is like as we get more and more integrated with, let's say, technology, it's like, what's the case for the human? And I think that's what I try to find more and more time. How do you make that case for the human and make it meaningfully, I don't know, real for you? So, good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, man. Interesting thoughts, honestly. Um, Isn't it funny that we have the same thought patterns like the old timers back in the ancient Greece or ancient Persia or even back probably further back? Same things, like more or less we have same freaking things. Like, why? Yeah, why wake up and do anything? Like,
Hmm.
what's the matter with it? And then you get into a bad situation, and then you are motivated by fear and pain, usually, and you do something. Sometimes we get rewarded then, but we have to stay on the grind to keep being rewarded, and then we are like, yeah, it's a funny situation. Yeah, I completely agree. I don't know.
Which that brings to me the question of like how much have humans changed? Because this is like I don't know modern. Maybe it's like a availability heuristic or this like short term memory where we always think we're on the right side of history, we're doing everything right, we're better. But it's like you can make an argument for something as simple as slavery. At least in the United States, I think that's the token argument. It says, "So look how much better we've gotten." It's like, well, kind of, but we're still using people over in the in different parts of sub-Saharan Africa that basically as slave labor to harvest all the minerals for the stuff we use. So it's kind of like I think in some senses technology is the only thing that changes. So you could make the argument that if there is something that has an evolutionary arc in existence, it is technology. It's not humans. Humans are simply just the thing that are building the technology because the technology is the only thing that's actually developing. Humans, I think, are afforded different luxuries based off of what technology will do, but that doesn't necessarily mean that our inner nature has changed. I like to think it has in some sense with our sensibilities, but let's just say the power grid were to go out and we're stuck. How quickly do we resort to, I want that, I'm bigger than you, I'm going to take that? I don't know. These are the tough questions, but I do think you raise a good point. It's like, since, I think that's the value of reading some of these things, the Marcus Aurelius, some of these great ancient works, from the passed down wisdom. It's collected in religious text as different works of philosophical authoring. Like there's, at least it reminds you in perspective that like, hey, you're a human that shares the inheritance of other humans and that asks the same questions as other humans. Don't think you're so special, but also like learn from these things and like there's a balance between like you are we are unique in our capacity to ask these questions, which does imply some amount of I don't say specialness, but I don't have a better lexicon for vocabulary, but there is some specialness, but at the same time, you're also a human amongst many. So there's humility. So such is life.
Yeah, yeah. Great questions. Great, great,
Sophie,
great.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's I don't know. It's Do you, Graham, do you believe in a godly creature that created the universe or Earth or humans? And is that even relatable to what we say, in your opinion? Does it relate?
I'll have two thoughts on that. One is answers that or questions that no human can know the answer to. Well, so there's two ways to look at that. One is that you could look as though that everything that exists now is an answer to some set of variables that was in the past. So, for example, I could look at this phone and say there's two ways I could look at this. This phone, this thing that exists, is a period in time, right? So this thing that is here was here for, or you could say it's here for a reason, but like things that are non-random, and so you could make the argument for randomness, and no one could say that. So the first part of this is things that humans can't know the answers to are probably there's debate on how valuable asking the question is. So I don't know, to be very clear. But I would look and say that things that have some form of non-randomness in terms of their existence, and again, you could make the argument that all things are random, who knows, multiverse or whatever, but you would say that this serves a purpose that was in response to the questions asked in the past. And now, with the variables of the present, those allow us to ask questions facing forward. So, if you think at this point in time, there's variables and there's questions in the past, answers in the present, opportunities in the future. So, I could say that the existence of all this is in some form an answer to something. And so that's one aspect, right? So, like, you know, this thing that exists came from somewhere. And you could say whether it's the Big Bang, whether it's creation, whether it's intelligent being, something created it. And I'm not like something, is that something. I can't speak to what that is. Again, going back to the idea of meaning in a sense, I find it most I find it most not motivating, but like engaging. Ca I find it best when I live as though there is some force of collective consciousness. If there is a God, humans A could never understand it. B, it is all of things in a whole in its entirety. C, we are part of that. And you know, I would like to think that the rare exception where humans can make intentional choices and lean into difficulty and challenge intentionally are those times where we exercise free will and in some sense become consciousness experience itself. So, you know, like to me, I, I'll say I live as though God exists, while also, and God meaning like all, like the sum consciousness of all things. I live as though that thing, that existence, that I am part of something that's bigger than me. That I live as though that concept, that thing exists and is true, with the reality, with the knowledge that I don't know, and if I were to die and realize, up, you just there's nothing like it. Eventually the sun blows up and swallows the whole universe, and you're like, well, look at that guy, he's an idiot. It's like, well, I still think that people who live in such a way that there is some type of like meaningful narrative, meaning I am connected to something that is bigger than me, live better lives than if
Mm.
they don't. So again, that's how I choose to live, while also acknowledging that. And I'll say the other side of that is, it's not choosing to live as such, is living for the means, not the ends. So for people who need a promise of, like, let's say, like, oh, you're going to go to the good place and have everlasting pleasure and joy and happiness, whatever. You could talk about the problems of heaven and hell as just concepts. Um, but people who need that carrot in order to act well, you could make the argument that the incentive underneath is missing for them to express some type of like meaningful goodness. Therefore, it is very hard to do in a sense. It's like, but I think this is repeated over and over and over again. Like, it's not about deserving something, but it's about like the intention. I think that they're so deeply ingrained. Like, we're not just they're material creatures, but we live on this kind of, you could call it conceptual, spiritual growth mindset. Like, it's all a different name. Like, fixed versus growth mindset is material versus spiritual, intrinsic, extrinsic value. Like, these are kind of the same, similar concepts, but people are able to live as though there is growth that is available, and that if I sacrifice something in the moment, then I will have a greater future gain. Like people who go and train, like for example, there is no need, no reason to go and do anything above and beyond the physical requirements by day. But people who go and physically sacrifice, embrace difficulty in the moment, end up having either some better understanding of their body, some greater awareness, some better physical capacity, and generally some more meaningfully calm and contented temperament. So, and whether through practice, but we learn that like by trusting in a future concept, a construct, a future construct, and living as though this thing will happen if this growth, this moreness will happen if I sacrifice what is less true about me now. Meaning, I could sit on the couch and do nothing, or I could do something challenging. And again, there's limits to that. Obviously, like listening to your body, but that is in itself believing in God, I would say. Like people who go and train with the intention of wanting to become more, I think that is believing in the concept of God, meaning that there is something I'm connected to, that if I trust this greater thing, it comes back to it. And I'll say that with the caveat, or not the caveat, with the understanding as well, that there are, I would call them material and spiritual sacrifices, meaning material sacrifices are an exchange. Like if I give you $20, you give me a service, right? There's an exchange, a direct exchange of a physical thing. If I cut off my arm, like I lose something, you get something. But I think a spiritual sacrifice has to do with like more of the conceptual inner belief side of things, where you're looking at like, if I show up with the intention. So the driving is the analogy I'd use for this. So how many people around the world drive for thousands of hours and yet are horrible drivers? They're just never there. And yet there's, like, so meaning time in seat doesn't guarantee success or expertise. And so I would say the other side is that people who, if you don't bring your attention, your intention, so the intention I think is a spiritual side. Like my physical presence, like we all know this. You get like in a relationship with your significant other, and they're like, "What do you want from me? I'm here. Isn't that what you want?" And we're all like, "No, like we all understand deeply, like, when a kid's like rolling their eyes, don't really care, or someone's like, I want you to want to be here. I want you. And there's something different. We understand this deeply, that there is a physical you, like, I'm here. And then there's like an emotional, like the full essence of you, which is like the intention. I'm setting the intention to be present. There's like physical presence, and then there's like real presence. And that to me is like understanding those two sides. Is you can't be physically present if you're not healthy, but you can't be intentionally spiritually. You can call it emotionally, but I think emotions are also deeply wired into our physical evolution. But let's just for the sake of this argument say there's some type of like, spiritual, conceptual, like psyche, ego, identity. Like, I'm going to be present physically here, and like emotionally and spiritually here. I think those two things are required for growth. Meaning, people will go to the gym. It's like people will go to the gym, they'll train, and they kind of see some results because they're kind of putting some in. They're making a physical sacrifice. Yeah, I went and I worked and I burned 100 calories, but they never lose the weight. They never get stronger. They never get faster until they really are there. They really look at a thing. And that is a skill in and of itself. Like, it's something, well, it's a skill, meaning to be able to channel focus that. But you really have to go and like believe that something will be valuable in return from this. And that could be started from fear. Like, you can be so afraid that, like, I'm going to absolutely pay attention. I'm going to figure this out. But the pain is the first teacher. And I think in some senses that's the lesson. So all that convoluted mess is to say, yes, I live as though there is God, because I think that offers me the best chance at experiencing the most meaningful and contented life. And I think underlying that, anybody who undertakes a process of meaningful growth and challenge with sacrificing, with intention and presence, as practice and meditation in a sense, that is someone who also believes in that concept as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's a lot. Yeah. Sorry, I've been
Yeah.
writing about it a lot.
It's an interesting thought pattern. You have interesting patterns of thought. So, have you studied any philosophy or something, or just comes out these days?
So I'm right. Well, there's two things. One is I grew up basically in the church as a Christian, and then over the high school, senior, I was very much like I took ownership a lot of the like the rules based side, because like to me there was something as like a young man, I was like I really wanted there to be rules. I think I was very un and I think this is true for a lot of people who don't like uncertainty. I wanted certainty. I wanted rules. I wanted someone to have the answers. I wanted everything to be like, I wanted there to be a big dad up in the sky that knew all the things, and I just have to go and pay attrition for all being a bad person, and it's good. It's like, but then as I got to meet more people and expanded my worldview, and there's just certain things that I realized like, I kind of threw it all out for a while, just like stepped away from everything, and then slowly, as I kind of walked back and just started to experience more things, I realized that there's tremendous wisdom. So one of the things that was very helpful was Jordan Peterson's biblical series, where he just and it's taking, let's say, these great works of human creation, meaning like humans have written and carved and created this library of the Bible, or Marcus Aurelius, Tao Te Ching, the Quran. Like, you look at these things that have been they're the ledger of human wisdom. And I think once you start to see that, you said at the beginning, like, we're not dissimilar from those things. And so if I don't look at myself as like the peak and pinnacle of human creation and go, oh, there's something to be learned from this, then I think this is the unique thing, is like the things. So I've always been interested in that. And the insecurity that started that interest was I wanted certainty. I wanted to figure it all out. But then as I grew, and psychedelics and mushrooms are incredibly valuable. We're doing work with coaching, some therapy, like self-talk, journaling, not self-talk, journaling and improving that self-talk. I started to slow. Actually, in reality, it's like things breaking, marriage ending, best friend dying. Like the pandemic. You start to realize that there's less and less in your control, and so this reliance and certainty is only going to make you more and more fragile and scared. You become little by just. I'm not doing anything great, but I'm just saying little by little, you become more okay with uncertainty, and you realize that most of life exists in a gray space. Like, is there a God? Is there not a God? Well, no one can know. So what do you choose? And like, you knowing full well that whatever you choose to believe could be have to inaccurate. So that's pretty gray space. So in that sense, like, becoming more okay with that has allowed me to see the wisdom of this passed down human tradition, this human inheritance, without having to without having to basically like latch on to this is my specific dogma and rules. So that's one side. I've always been interested in that, mostly because I don't want to waste what I'm doing. I feel as though my what I do, like, I for whatever reason, I don't like to make mistakes. maybe this is a deep down thing, like a first world view kind of thing, but I don't like to make mistakes. Therefore, I like to make sure I'm doing the thing that's right. And I don't want to waste my time doing something that's inefficient or wrong. Therefore, I want to know what the right answer is. It's a very strong compulsion to try and learn that stuff. And then as I've through that compulsion, it's kind of taught me a little bit more into a more informed second worldview, an intentional self-authored worldview. And so that's what I've been writing about. So I'm in the middle of this book. I've been writing for 4 years, really. It's just, in earnest this last few months. But there's kind of like two parts, like honoring the animal, becoming the athlete. It's the animal-based athlete, basically. It's this idea of like there is this like I discussed. It's not necessarily a spiritual side. It is a spiritual side, but I understand that that pushes people away. There's so much like connotation to the words that we don't actually think about what it means to be fully present, and we don't look at what it is, how it is we live. We kind of have these ideas like, "Oh, I don't believe in that stuff. That's for children." It's like, yeah, but you act like you do. And so if you accept the fact that you act as though this construct exists in the way you think about your kids, your family, your work, your training, your endeavors, your life, then you can actually full-heartedly lean into that and have a lot more concentrated effort. But that only happens when you honor the animal, meaning there's the physical tissue we exist in. There's the like learning to connect with things like your eyesight, your physical, your feet touching the ground, understanding your sleep, your light exposure, your what you put in, what you consume, both intellectually, emotionally, and physically. How you what you touch, what you engage, what you see, how you live with the light, how you sleep. Like those things inform the health of your physical body, which has incredible intelligence, and that allows you to kind of clear the filter, so to speak, that you can now become more in touch with like setting intentions and goals for what you want to do, and then you move forward into the world as though there is some greater meaning. And basically all of this is my ability to try and understand. I'll say Christianity because that's the most thing I'm most familiar with without the Christianese, because I just got to this point where like I'd go to church and or like be around people, and they would just start like, I'm redeemed, I'm saved. It's like, what does that mean? And by the time people are saying something and they don't actually have any personal understanding for what that means, they're not talking real. They're not. They're no longer speaking to you. They're just like saying the party line, and that that really bothered me. And so I was like, I just really want to understand, what does this mean. So then you kind of go on this path, you figure out a little bit more, but not like I've figured out. I'm just kind of like trying to let my ego sit a little bit to the side while I actually try to look at these things with the humility you mentioned earlier, like that. These humans have come for thousands of years before and asked these deep questions, and I am by no means anywhere near the smartest. So those are interesting thoughts I have that are not common to me, not uncommon.
All right. Are you dreaming about all that stuff sometimes?
You know what's interesting, and like you'd have to quantify what a dream is at night, because I do think that the concept of daydreaming is valuable as well in some sense. Like we go through. So, for example, I did a mushroom trip this last weekend for Earth Day. Just what I like to use, and I understand not everybody is comfortable with the psychotropics or the entheogens. But for me, they've been a valuable filter for the last few years. For every 3 to 6 months, I'll do a larger trip and just kind of like sit with that. And in some sense, it feels like I'm able to just be fully present, and I'm able to kind of connect with some intelligence that then it takes me a few months to just really understand and just kind of download. But part of it, so recently I've been wearing, I've mentioned the eyes a few times, but I grew up, I have these very thick glasses. It's like, Coke bottle lens that I've had since I was 2. I wear contacts most of the time. That's why most people don't know that. But in some capacity, you realize, like, if you think about what the eyes are, I mean, even just for example, like how often do you make eye contact with somebody? Like really sit there and look at them. And even now, it's like if I look at your eyes, I'm not looking at your eyes, and so it's hard to do on this Zoom and remote stuff. Has made it even harder. But if you sit down and you look at somebody with their eyes, it's like with your eyes, it's like the eye contact is like strangely uncomfortable to be seen. And even Lord of the Rings, which I think is one of my favorite little trilogies, but like the Eye of Sauron, it's just like staring at you. It's like it's this piercing gaze. And so like there's something about that. And you know, we kind of think of this eyesight as something that's fixed, and so we wear glasses. In the same way that you look at feet, they're fixed, but the eyes are just the three parts of the triangulation. So our balance, meaning our ability, what is balance? Our ability to connect to something that is stabilizing in our life is triangulated based off three things: is the vestibular inner ear complex, is our eyesight visual feedback, and there's proprioceptive awareness. So you put me in shoes that have an inch stack height and orthotics that completely take away any sensation I get from the ground, and I walk on pristine flat two-dimensional surface that takes that out. Then I'm always looking. I don't ever move my head, so I'm moving my whole torso, so my neck gets stiff, and I'm never actually rolling or doing anything. And so that vestibular thing gets kind of fixated. The inner ear thing doesn't really work as well. And then, if you have poor eyesight, it's like you're taking away this triangulation of your ability to be balanced and connected. So therefore, when you're no longer grounded, to what do you connect to? If you're like you're more likely to short circuit. I do think as I learn more about electrons and the exchange or the contact to the earth, it's like, you know, but these are just I know very topically. I'm not an expert by any means in this stuff. I'm just asking. These are the questions I'm asking now and moving towards trying to understand like what is the value of being barefoot, because I don't think it's just as simple as wear barefoot shoes, minimalist shoes, and you're all good. It's like, no, no, no. There's an actual, like, the fact that our feet have sweat glands that are meant to improve the conductivity of our contact with the ground surface to absorb electrons, to balance out the acidity from whatever the food we eat, the movement we do. Like, it's truly unbelievable. And that is lost when we're just kind of removed from that. So, in some sense, I go through and you kind of look at this stuff. But the point of this is like, on this mushroom trip, I'm sitting there like, I was with my partner and it was just like staring at her and I'm looking at her skin. And it's just like, I swear there's just, it struck me because like I have this definition of like, oh, I've got bad eyesight. I'm farsighted. So like it's you, whether or not you can see is second to the fact of whether or not you look. It's like, I, I think it's really hard to put into words, but it's like, you can walk through your life and never actually look at anything. You can kind of go through and you have like sufficient enough vision that you can see. Like, all right, what's 2020? Well, I mean, I can generally see things, but it's like, what does it mean to actually look and like be fully present into looking at a thing? And so the point is, I sat there and I was wearing contacts, but then I took glasses off and I just started doing some stuff in my eyes, so working on those. But I was just really looking, and it's like that's one of the things about mushroom trips is you actually really look at things. And then I realized like my eyes were dialed in. I'm like talking like microscopic vision. It was phenomenal because I could see hair follicles and stuff. And there's a few years passed when I was on a walk and I just took my glasses off, and it's just kind of like you just take my glasses off, and I was just like, man, you kind of like it would be no different than walking through a dark room. You don't actually look at anything, and so I realized I've been seeing stuff, but I'm never looking. And that skill right there is like, and that switch right there is like giving sight to the blind in a sense. And so most people go through the life, and it's like, let's say you have sufficient eyesight. Well, it's sufficient to get through things. Like, well, I can't see the thing that's like 100 feet away, and I can't actually look at something that's that close or really small. So no one has like, in a sense, eyesight is something you can train and develop. And some people are told they have bad eyesight, and so then they never work on it. And even people who never question it never question it. And so all of these things, like for example, you go and you train, you do strength work. It's like, there's sufficient strength required for your daily life, but you never think like, well, why not go and see if I can be stronger? And we make arbitrary goals to try and do that, but through the training, we develop some awareness. And so eyesight is no different. We can train it and work on it and develop this. And there's some, if you can develop some great awareness about the world by being stronger, being able to pick up and being, for example, if you can jump, this is a silly example, but let's say you could jump 20 inches off the ground, you're going to see something that most people can't. If you could jump 30 inches, you're going to see something and I'm not just saying see as in physically, but I mean like literally experience rarefied air. Like a tiny fraction of percentage of humans have ever been in a plane that's seen the ground from above the clouds. Like, think of how a smaller percentage of people that have ever existed have ever seen the top of a cloud. It's crazy. And so that happens because somebody believed and paid attention to something for long enough to make that happen. And so, in the same sense, when you experience some further capacity than what is necessary in your physical body, you're able to see things that other people don't. And it gives you experience and wisdom and knowledge that most people will never have. The same thing happens with eyesight in every other sense of your body. It's just whatever is interesting for you to pursue. And I think that's the diaspora of humanity. That's not the correct use of that word, but it's like that's the spread of humanity and our unique interest. So all that to be said is it's this point of looking. And so when we're not looking at something, we're kind of dreaming. We're going through, you're lost in your thoughts. You're sleeping at night is one thing, but being able to sit there and let your thoughts wander. And it's like when I was younger, I used to really resent my brain because, like, I was always thinking and I was always scattered. My teachers always said I had ADHD. I actually got tested, which is a total shame, but I got professionally tested by a therapist and put on ADHD medication for a year, and that locked me down. I was very productive and effective, but it seemed like there was a cost where, like, it took me a few months to withdraw from that medication. I was exhausted for months afterwards. But I do think that, like, that hyper focus you get from, I think caffeine's a little bit different, but basically it's like, you're on Ritalin, you're like basically one methylated thing different away from like actual methamphetamine. And, I think that comes at a cost of like this ability to play and to dream and to think. And so when you ask whether I'm dreaming, it's like, yeah, I mean, constantly. But I think most of what we see in a dream is kind of like imagining things that could exist but don't. And those who don't dream are those who don't create. And in some sense, it's like when I make content, when I make, I hate the word content now too, but because it's like content. What's content? Like, I want to make content. It's like, well, content's like a tchotchke. You get the dollar section at Target, or which is America, but like it's just stuff you put between walls to just fill up sound. It's like I want to make something that's meaningful. But I guess I'm not so pretentious as to call it art yet. Um, but the point is, it's like when I make something, I'll get struck by something somebody says and then have this entire vision of like, "Oh, this is the real. This is how it go. You're gonna say this, you're gonna go here. This is how we visualize this." And it's like that sort of dreaming. And I was always scattered. So when I was younger, like I felt scattered. I was anxious. I need to have the rules. I didn't want to mess things up. But then as I like, again, the help of a few mushroom trips are just helpful to kind of like separate you from this like this judgmental voice in your head. You kind of put that aside for a little bit and you're just able to be present and you realize like, oh, this is nice. You're unencumbered by the egoistic comparison. And then that kind of unlocked this capacity to feel, as Marcus Aurelius says in his books, like, remember, you always have a place within yourself that you can retreat when things get scary. Like, don't use it too often, but it's like this moment of like, oh, you can. It's not really meditation because I think meditation almost implies you're like it's the letting go of all, but it's just like this retreat of like, that's an interesting question. Let me think about that. And it's like I've become my own friend in a sense, and I like my brain, I like my mind. So like now it's just like taking time, like actually setting aside time to dream, I guess is the thing. Even when, especially when you're awake, it's just like, let me ponder that and think on that. And like, that's interesting. Just go for walks and just like, so yeah, I guess it is something you just dream about all the time. But it's something you'll say a word and it'll strike me as like, huh, that's an interesting. I wonder where that word comes from. Like in unencumbered, for example, is a great word. It's like like encumbered. It's like you break these things down, like, but to be unencumbered, like to be encumbered, to be burdened, to be unencumbered is like you're free, you're enlightened, and so like enlightened, you're in the light. It's like the light of understanding. You see things. It's just interesting. Like most of it amounts to nothing, but a lot of that, like I think the brain sticks on these things, and I don't know. Such is life. I try to put it together to a meaningful thing and like actual like explanations for people, but a lot of it comes from just exploration on my end.
Do you think you are an explorer or an educator or both?
You know, I think I would probably have to say both because I think I'm neither as good of an explorer as I could be and neither as good as an educator I could be. Like I've gotten to work with some amazing coaches in this last year. So I've been a trainer and a coach for about a decade and work with people. I owned a gym in the past before I moved out to California to kind of do a little bit more of this, whatever it is I'm doing now. And, in the process, you get to be around some amazing coaches. Like I'm talking like Ben Patrick, Joel Seedman, the go-to guys, David Weck, Chris Chamberlain, you got Gary Linehan, like you just Les Spellman, like the list goes on and on. These people that like are really well that have like a decent following on Instagram, or even people that don't. It's just like they are phenomenal coaches, like just so good. I mean, they really care. They're great educators. They're great at like being with someone, inspiring them. And then there's people that are just like so creative and they're so out there and in their capacity to think about things and just put things together. And I think in some sense, if you want to be, yeah, I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but I try. Like, in some senses, like how would I explain this to someone else is always kind of my underlying ethos. And so, in some capacity, like I go out and explore it, but like the capacity to explain it and tie this thing down in a way that's meaningful for other people that to me shows that I understand it. And so I'm kind of stuck between the two. It's like, okay, once I understand I can explain it, then I tend to get bored. So, meaning if I were a great educator, I would really sit down and that's why I write. So, like, I write to understand in a way that I can explain it. But once I've written it down and put it out there, I'm like, all right, I want to go back out. So I kind of go back and forth in this thing. And so, in some capacity, I'm not saying I'm not skilled at both realms, but I would probably say that my capacity to be truly great at either is limited by this kind of like being in the middle. But there's a role for that. I mean, I don't know. I don't judge how I am. I think it's valuable because it doesn't matter what you explore if you can't explain it, and it doesn't matter what you explain if you can't understand it. So, I mean, like you don't fully like viscerally get it. So that's how I would see myself, but it might not be an accurate reflection.
Hmm. Interesting. Sometimes people say about the academics, so there is a lot of conversation about colleges, if there is any meaning about them.
Mm,
I don't know about sport colleges, but sometimes people these days are against most academia based on their monomaniacal, at least perception of the monomaniacal focus on writings and readings and not
mm,
too much action and exploring. So that's why I asked you, because I know that you are what I see from your Instagram is you make things fun, light, and you see to explore different angles and talk about things. You bring guests.
mm,
Certainly in my eyes you are an educator, because you talk about the how to sprint properly, how to mobilize your body
mm,
properly, how to fix some imbalances. um, but you are also an explorer, and to me my answer to you is of course both, on the spectrum. And I think the both answers should be probably the optimal for every human,
mm,
based on what I see from myself also, which I'm far behind you and many others. But I'm seeing that the only way to educate is also to explore. You cannot do it. What you said exactly was the point. You cannot be. They are not mutually exclusive. In fact,
mm.
I would say they are probably more connected than people believe. So that's the point.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the so from a different perspective on that, the medical professional society. So when people have an experience of pain and they go and get a doctor, or then they go to radiologist, they get a CT scanner, an MRI, then they go down this path: medical products, medical insurance, medical professional, like this grind. And that's the problem there is that there's no exploration. There's people who like, I'll say once you've productized something, meaning once you put something into a repeatable experience for other people, that doesn't leave room for creativity, then you've, in some sense, your goal is to try and fit people into that. Meaning, you've created a round square, and you're trying to put, I guess you've created a circle hole, and you're trying to smash squares into that, in a sense, or like you've created a hammer, and now you're looking for nails. And I think that's the hard part is that people go in and they have some experience, and pain is such a multifaceted, complex thing that I don't think the modern like the modern like say our current iteration of how we manage it, whether it's you know an insurance company kind of dictates who you get to go see, but that person is kind of constrained on what they can talk about, who they can recommend, and then the product companies are funding it all, making lots of money on it. But again, that's not necessarily a problem, but it's just it's an externality of the system that is people aren't they're professionals, but they're not amateurs as well. Amateur means it's from like amo, for the love of, amateur, the Greek Latin etymology of the word. And so like it's someone who just does something for the love of, or an explorer in some sense. And so, you know, just because you're professional at something doesn't mean you love it. And if you don't love something, it's really hard to be good at. And so I think that's the hard part is you have a lot of people who jump through at every level. It's a product. Colleges are offering the product of an education. Medical companies are offering the product of braces, orthotics, sleeves, etc. Physical therapists and medical professionals are offering the product of services, whether that's surgery, that's a product. You look at like in the same way a brace is a product, a surgery is a product, a physical therapy treatment session is a product. And the productization is valuable because that is the encapsulation of this exploration chunk that's now been understood. But once something, I heard it yesterday, once a measure becomes a target, it no longer serves as a good measure. Meaning, if I say being able to do 20 push-ups is a great measure of your strength, and then everyone just trains to do 20 push-ups, like, well, then they actually end up becoming weaker in other areas. So now the measure becomes a horrible measure. So it's like the same thing. So once something becomes a product, it's no longer a useful product. I think that's the hard part, is that, like, and it's not across the board, because, like, for example, I could write a book, and that doesn't mean that it is by no means that. It's just like there's a few things, like, it's like these things that we create are meant to be like markers and go into, and we have updates. And technology just allows us to update things and continue to improve our thoughts, but you know you can't. It's tough, because this is a gray area thing, because, like, all right, you say get rid of products, like, well, then what's the world without products? It's like everything is high ticket, so to speak. That's the alternative. It's like one-off coaching, one-off. It's like, and then the wisdom doesn't get accrued, because a physical product, meaning a physical presentation of something, is a marker in history that allows us to work and to learn from. And if everything is done in a bespoke manner, we don't learn from anything, and that's the hard part. So you do need both. And so, like, I offer these products, these programs, but the way I try to offset that is that the book and the training, that I've actually gone through 5 versions of the programs for the foot, because actually it's 5 at this point. 5 versions is the modern thing, but I had a few versions beforehand. But, like, I'm talking in 4 years, I've updated this thing 6 or 7 times, just because, like, I'm constantly exploring. And I've had a few thousand people go through it, like, that's a lot of feedback, and it's like, oh wow, okay. But the point is, I offset the stagnant nature of the fact that there's a book and a program that are, they're there, with biweekly coaching calls and direct coaching. So I'm getting feedback, and people that have interesting, they can bring their unique experience and then ask questions about the stuff. So, like, I think in that sense, but that's only my ability to do that is only as valuable as my ability to go push forth. And so the way I do that is by training the sprint, training to be able to be stronger, more dynamic, more athletic. And so, in some sense, it's like I'm no longer working to get out of pain. My feet feel great. But my feet feel great until I go and push the notch up one more higher. Then I get some feedback. Oh, my calves feel stiff, my foot hurts, or this happens. So, like, it's like, if the medical professional, so to speak, if the person who you are looking to is not on their own journey, that's a few steps ahead of you, then eventually their creation, their product, their understanding becomes fixed and calcified at time. And so, the way you bring a product to life is to continually pour effort into it. And this is actually the interesting difference between, like, a membership. So let's say I did a membership, and then everyone want to get new training every week. It's like, well, if I do something new every week, that's constantly varied, and that's nice, but no one ever starts with a meaningful education. So there needs to be some. This is, I guess, the epitome between, like, primary school, secondary school, and college. It's like, as you go through, primary school needs to be the most consistent and fixed experience for all kids, in a sense, because it's like, we're going to go through and learn, like, the basics, the alphabets. This is, how we say names. This is how we spell
Mhm.
words, whatever. Then secondary school, you get a little more open ended, and then college should be, like, absolutely vastly, like, go explore. And like you said, it should be a combination of, like, learning, some intellectual, but mostly doing. Like, internships, I think, are a really great example of this, because, like, you start to get more and more open ended, because life, you continue to still learn. But I think the problem is that, like, most people realize now, the sham of college is, like, you don't pay for anything out of the college other than a piece of paper, and that doesn't guarantee you anything. But now with YouTube, with limitless podcasts, I mean, that's where I've
Yeah.
learned almost everything I've ever known. It's like self study, people that write books, like, you can go and create your own university. The problem is there's no certification with it, but people see through that. I think that as employers change their tune on that, it'll happen sooner than later. But the point is that, like, there's this, you start off fixed and you open up, because if I have a membership and someone joins and they're just doing week 419 of the programming, it's like, well, they didn't do the same shared history. So, in jujitsu, in a sense, like, there's the basic, that's why jujitsu is really hard to pick up on occasion, because, like, the old school way of teaching it can be, because it's like you kind of get thrown into classes and you're just like, all right, go learn it. It's like, if I play chess, you'll eventually get there, but big there's a big loss of, like, um there's high attrition in the beginning, because you're, like, just getting beat up for a year. I've been doing it for a year, 74 classes, and I still haven't tapped to I still haven't tapped anybody meaningfully. And it's like, right, that's a lot of ass kicking that I've been subject to. And, I'm just now picking up the fundamentals. So, you know, I think that's the hard part, is that, like, college used to serve a purpose as a place to go, and college used to be an internship for like intellectual professions, and now it's supposed to be this experience where everyone goes and like it's changed. It is college and universities are no longer what they used to be. They've metastasized into a protection of the institution itself as opposed to a place do you do it. So like, you know, if you went to an electrician, if you went to an internship as an electrician and you came out of that and the UN, they said, oh, we want to guarantee you feel safe and included the whole time. It's like, no, I want you to guarantee that I can be a functioning electrician by the time I get, like, that's what I'm actually here for. It's like, that's different. And so the hard part is that like, it's not incentivized. I mean, there's layers and layers we can talk about for why, but ultimately it's like people are seeing through that. So ultimately it goes down to the idea, like, education is a continuing process, but it's a continuing. There's ever more ideation that happens and individualization as you branch off into your unique thing. So by the time you're 30, you should be like well set in this is the thing that I am uniquely poised to do and want to explore with my life. And it's a
Yeah.
tragedy that more people don't see that avenue as possible.
Yeah. Well, I don't, well, I can ask you a few more questions, but I don't know if we have the time. Uh,
I can make time if you.
but yeah,
I
I
mean, we
could
got
go
it.
for a little bit more.
Okay.
So there is a lot of question about the modern times because I listened carefully about what you say, and sorry about me moving around. The sun is trying to block me.
I see. I see it.
It's I love the sun, but now he's my enemy for now. So there is a lot of so back in the day, as you say, it was more of an intellectual process, more of an intellectual journey to go to the universities, like in the early 20th century, probably up to the 70s or something. And as we went on, the university started becoming more solid, but in a bad way. I don't know how to express the word. And
Solidified. Like,
solidified.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, more
Fixed.
patented, more like a
Productized.
pattern, like protecting our patterns and not leaving other voices out. And I know
Yeah.
this because I talk with a few inventors in the channel, and they've educated me about patterns and about companies actually, not companies also, but pharmaceuticals trying
Mm.
to how do you say this, ensure things, like try to make it work for a long time, for decades, so that they can earn
Mm.
money out of it. But that stifles, of course, progress and pure real progress, not the fake one.
Yeah.
uh, but I want to ask about the other thing you say about no more people don't understand their life's calling by the age they are 30, and I agree for the most part. It's a modern thing, especially in Greece. If you come over sometime, many kids here are educated in university degrees,
Mm.
and like the vast majority, and I'm not kidding, like probably 60 to 70% of them are either not working in the profession they were educated, or and they start a second degree because they didn't actually want to be there. um, so I wonder, is it that people don't know by the age of 30 or 35 what their life's calling is, or are we getting softer or maybe more malleable as a society, a species, so that we cannot actually forge our way towards our own maybe destiny, or however you can say,
Mm.
profession? What are your thoughts?
This is a few confluences here that like or influences that are like coming together. One of which I think is, in some sense, youth today. So, like, I say the idea of 30 and 35. It's an arbitrary number in many extents. But I will say that it's that number range of 30 to 35. It doesn't mean that you don't. It means that you have some. The idea of that is you have some self awareness from the first, roughly give or take, third of your adult life, or like let's say from 10 to 30 is like, if the average lifespan is about 70 to 80, then like from 10 to 30 is roughly about the first third. So you should have some awareness from like your childhood and the early adult years that you're able to say, yeah, this is who. If you've lived in a body for 30 years and you don't have some capacity to say, yeah, this is who I am, this is what I like, this is what I want to focus on, this is what brings me life. We can say there's a failure of some self awareness, something that's blocked feedback. And so it's not so much that so it's like many of the greatest things happen when people like for creations and stuff will, happen people are older, but it's the reality is around 30, 35, if you haven't started thinking about like dating a significant other, potentially, getting into a meaningful relationship, having kids, it's like that biological clock starts ticking. And so the thing is, it's not that, obviously everyone doesn't have to do that. But the point is, like, that's about the time people are like, yeah, okay, this is something I want to focus on. And what happens, so I don't have any kids of my own, but what happens, so I'm told, is that your time goes from about like you have, 80, 90% of your free time that's obligation free to about like 20% of your time. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, so like if anything is not essential, it basically gets cut out. And so if you don't have a really good feel for this is something I do that brings me life and meaning, I'm going to make this priority. It's really hard to add that in after. It's not impossible, but it's hard. And the idea is that if you have some level of momentum and let's say direction on where you want to go, then you can start to make progress. The hardest thing, it's once you have momentum, it's easy to maintain that because naturally, by the second law of thermodynamics, it wants to stay in there. Like that object wants to stay in momentum. So, like, all right, good. So, but it's hard to get it started in a sense. So, that's one piece. But the other side is like, for people that are starting a second degree, there's two things that you could say there. There's a failure of college to actively encourage and enable some level of like individual capacity. There's three things going on here. There's one level you could say it's a failure of the college and institution to deliver, but in some sense, I think if you actually looked at college for what it is, you would. We're only hurt by the lies we believe. Meaning, if I go to college and I think I'm going to get this great paying job, all the stuff is like you're missing the point. Colleges don't guarantee anything other than a piece of paper. Now, what you learn on that, how you present yourself, if you learn how to sell, how to talk, and how to like, educate or whatever it is, to with the exception, you get like a professional degree, which is a little bit closer. But the reality is, like, the only guarantee a college can ever give you is here's a piece of paper if you graduate. That does not mean that you'll be P equals MD. It doesn't mean you'll be marketable or professional. So that's a self failure if you really look at it. I mean, like you're just letting the colleges are very honest about what they do, and it's like you go people can go to a community college and have a great experience. So it's like as much as we want to blame the institution, that's looking outside of ourselves, and you always have to look ourselves for the responsibility. The second thing would be, uh, let's say, in individuals' eh, inability to differentiate into an adult, and I think this is kind of both the responsibility of the parent. So we look at most people, and especially in the United States, the average person is overweight on medication. 90% of people are not metabolically healthy. So there's a lot of like dishealth going on, a lot of dissatisfaction, there's a lot of disease. And if you really think about that, those are people who are not functioning well as humans, meaning they haven't even taken responsibility of their own body. And then, let alone, we're supposed to think that that person who can't be responsible for the very thing that they've been entrusted with is supposed to now turn around and be a kick-ass employee and then also amazing parents. Like people who avoid the hard things tend to do so across the board. When we have kids, I think the seeing of that potential gives us an opportunity to start fresh. And so there is people. It's not to say that people aren't trying and doing the best they can. It's saying that unfortunately we've lost a certain capacity of elders, meaning an appreciation. First, older people that act in regard to be respected, meaning in accordance with what it would mean to be respected, but also the respect for older people. So as technology, one of the unfortunate externalities of technology is that, like, okay, we picked up. I have a phone. I have video games, all the stuff. It's like, grandma, you don't even understand it. Like, it's hard to connect because like the pace of our society has picked up seemingly, and it made older people seem irrelevant. And so we stopped looking at older people as we always have generations past to say, huh, what would you think about this? We don't learn to the wisdom. So in some sense, there's also, a certain loss of responsibility on their end to shepherd and do this because you're looking out. They're the same generation that is still the older. You look at part of the problem in college is that most of the employment, there's more administrators at most colleges than there are professors. There's more people that are, the presidency of the United States is probably, unfortunately, going to go to another election with the oldest two people ever. They're 80. My parents are 65. I can't imagine them starting the job of a president in 15 years. It just, like you don't even have to talk about anything other than the fact that like again, it's not an ageism thing. It's like in the world, like most leaders around the world have continued to get older and older and older. So it's like you look at the Nobel prizes and different awards within the institution. It's like peer review and all these things they're incentivizing the same circle of people, so we're regurgitating the same ideas, and that is goes in direct contradiction to the pace of technology. I mean, you can look at the TikTok, the TikTok CEO going on in front of like the U.S. I don't know, Senate or Congress people. It's like the questions they're asking are just this. It's like we have a very big disconnect. So in some sense, there's a loss of responsibility for the old people to let go and to enable and bring other people into them, because it's like, you know, they hold a lot of properties. It's like there's just a certain level of like externalities when people don't embrace death. But when you this goes into a appreciation and mortality. It's like when you hold on to everything in life and try to squeeze things out and you take as much as you can for yourself, you leave nothing for other people. And so there's an appreciation of the fact that there are other people that come. It's not just me. And there's an ability to pass on. I've done my thing. I've learned my lesson. Let me pass on to the next individual. Um, like you see that over and over in successful societies, secession is just as important as becoming. So they're equal phases. And so when the older population isn't allowing the younger population to take responsibility, the younger population continues to live in this kind of prolonged adolescence. Then you also see that too with like the advent of like more gentle parenting and people that don't want to like do anything. And like the technology has softened the corners of playgrounds, so to speak, literally and physically, and that's kind of prevented feedback. And I think feedback is one of the valuable things. So you can make the analogy with shoes. If I want someone to learn how to run correctly and quickly, take your shoes off, put you on, turf or a track or something that's like a safe known surface, you're going to figure it out almost within like 5 minutes. Like it's so simple. It's just your body gets immediate feedback from the ground. That's pain. So if I block pain from people, from my kids, even with the best of intentions, I block the ability to learn. And so what we've done is we've used technology. That's really frustrating. I wish I didn't have to do with that. Oh, I got a tool, product to do that. Now I don't have to do with anything. And so even just to the extent that we don't have to be bored because we always have a phone, there's a long-term trade-off of our capacity to handle hard things. And not across the board, because it does allow us to have higher leverage on things, but you can't both make the argument for the bad without saying the good, and the good and the bad of technology. It's like there's trade-offs, right? So it's an older generation that's holding on to, so there's less opportunities in some capacity. There's other opportunities, you just have to move. But with a blocking of the feedback and necessarily a moving of things online, which kind of feeds into a third thing, I think there's a disillusionment about what is possible and real versus what is presented. Because like I see there's a lot of kids I get to hang out with over the years, and even now there's kids that are like young man, 18, 19, 20, like early 20s, late teens, and they kind of want to do like the most important job someone wants to be now is an influencer. It's like, well, the problem with that is you can present as an influencer and look good by doing the right TikTok dance with the right filters in a handful of weeks. And you can only be an expert by doing something for years, decades in a sense. And so there's a loss of this like being able to sit in the long board, because for most of humanity, if you're a young man, I mean, in the United States, for example, you can't be president until you're 35. So like the years of 15 to 25 would have been very boring, very repetitive. You would have been training, you would have been interning. When you hit 13, you would have been like interning, you were learning a skill, doing something, and then like, you wouldn't, and then you maybe have done like service or been connected to something. It's like, you know, no one would respect you. No one, you wouldn't even have, like you wouldn't have anything to go and do because you didn't spend any time doing it. And so now it's like, instead of skipping the boring years of developing a skill by doing the really stupid, really dumb, really repetitive, wax on, wax off tasks, you don't get any of that. And so then it's like you're disillusioned because you want to go do something and you're only seeing the outcome of someone else's hard work. You're looking into Mr. Beast, not realizing that man put 20 years of work into about 2 years because he's obsessed, literally obsessive. And they see other people that are obsessive and they don't see the behind the scenes. That means you were, they don't see, it's just not, so there's a disconnect and a disillusion about like what it actually takes to achieve this thing you say you want and what it is that you're willing to do. And that's hard. So I would say this is a three-pronged thing. There's no feedback. There's a loss of connection. There's a loss of feedback. There's a loss of like actual connection with meaningful hard work. And then, there's a willing, full ability to believe that everything's going to be fine. And that's, go back to the last thing I'll say on it. Like I would connect that to the first thing we talked about. Like it's the people who speak Christianese and want to just say, oh, God's forgiven me. God is this. It's like, there's this like they just want to have this kind of like offloading of self-responsibility belief that like there's this thing in the air that exists and it's got everything worked out. I don't have to do anything. It's like if you look through the wisdom of the Bible, especially the Old Testament, the New Testament, it's like you know it, the belief that pervades through us, that exists and that manifests through our actions, is what speaks to our true character and our true like our true essence. And if that is only motivated because it's like I don't want to do hard things, or I'm only going to do this because they're paying me. It's like those two things, those are the lukewarm stuff. Like that's the people who like they say the right stuff, but like you could tell they're not about it. People that are about it are doing the thing and they're not talking about it. And like it is not. I just think that there's like when it becomes easy to be, and this is the same thing on the you look at the like woke ideology or whatever it is. It's like green ideology of the climate. Like you just want to like say the thing, but they don't want to be the thing. And I've heard it said like beliefs are the things that cost you. Beliefs are what you do when they still cost you. When it's really inconvenient and it's not fun for you to do, and you still do it, that's a belief. That's something that's your values in a sense. And so like not a belief. I think values is what values are what you do when they cost you. So like how you handle customers that are difficult, how you operate and create a business, how you communicate, like what you claim, what you live, how like everything goes onto that. So it's tough. It might not be tough. It just is what it is. That's actually a good point. It's not tough. It's not easy. It's not tough. It just is what it is. There's no other way around it. When you attach a label to it and make it difficult, it becomes difficult, and then you think it's difficult. But when you just see it for what it is and you just choose to love it, and like that's the beauty. When you can see things for you can see people, that's true love in a relationship. Like when you could see, I think loving is just being able to see somebody. When you can see somebody with their warts and flaws and their good parts and still choose to be there, like to show up. Like choosing to show up is commitment. And seeing you is loving you. Like if I truly love you and I see you and I still choose to show up, it's one of the most redeeming things we could ever have. I think we do that naturally with parents, not all the time, but because like there's no other option. But I think that like because there's no other option, we show up. I think that's the thing. I don't know. I could keep going, but like that's the idea. Is like the first time people will really show up and make something of their lives is when they're forced to. Like you have a kid, and this kid's gonna die if I don't take care of it, and it's like a real responsibility, and like, fuck, and that really wakes them up. The sad part is it takes people 25, 30, 35, 40 years to have that first experience, and they're like, then they have a midlife crisis because like, oh wow, I'm doing this, and it's like, so it's if you can learn that through failure and hardship of really showing up, like seeing things as like that's what the value is. If you're like a young man, or I can't speak for women, I've never identified as one, but if you're a young man and you go from 13 to 18 and you work your ass off and you develop a skill set, and now it's like people come start looking at you like, hey, will you come help me with this? Like they treat you with respect as what you've done. Like you say, I did that hard thing and now I'm here. I was here, now I'm here. That's the value of sports as a modern day application of that. It's like that's the capacity to develop some level of self-awareness and self-valuation. And then from there you could say, oh, what else could I do if I showed up and was my best self? Those are the men that become leaders. Like, but that's how it's been. And we've removed that kind of natural stepping stone because like, as you said, colleges have become products and they're just focused on like maintaining the sameness. It's institutional fossilization, ossification.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree, man. Completely. I can't add anything to that. So it's interesting about the feedback you say. So I know we're closing slowly, but I'm wondering, you say they have the first experience and it takes them 25 years or something, 20 years. Um, and I'm wondering, and this is the last question before we go. Are is the society more complex in our minds because we've gotten more soft, at least comparing myself and our generation, our millennials or whatever. I don't know. How old are you? I'm 32, supposedly, chronologically.
I
Um,
turn 30 next week, so I'm still 20.
so,
I'm still in my 20s.
it, so exactly, we are same age, more or less.
Mm.
So I'm hearing the stories from my grandparents. They're still alive. They are in their 90s, and they live up in the mountains. Like Greece is a very mountainous area.
Hmm.
For those that don't know that, we have a lot of mountains. In Europe, we are like second after Austria. Um, and the stories you hear from the early 20th century, and even, of course, earlier, even worse, there's no I'm finding myself, there's no I'm confused about life, at least not in the sense we do it nowadays, I think. Now this
Hmm.
is what I've been the stories that have passed down the generations. And I'm hearing people back in the day that they were in marriages with other people that sometimes it didn't exactly was ideal, but they actually make it work.
Hmm.
They survived. They were more grateful for many things. They usually are not arrogant. So my grandparents and the neighbors, yeah, they can make some fun, but they take things more lightly. Like they don't get insulted very
Hmm.
easily, and even if they do, it's very fast. It goes away. So it's more
Hmm.
light-hearted community, based on survival and a little bit of prosperity when times are better. Which
Hmm.
older people knew that times are good and bad, good and bad. There were cycles. And when I say old people, I mean even my grandparents,
Hmm.
they were like dirt poor. They grew up literally dirt poor. Like
Hmm.
sometimes they didn't have to eat for 2 3 days. So I'm wondering, it's always in my mind because you hear the news. I guess you hear the news like I do sometimes, even though I try to block them. But you hear the news and the whole degeneracy there, and you hear, people screaming out of their minds about, everything is falling apart. And I'm just, comparing to the old stories, and I'm like, dude, first of all, we're not even close. Second of all, are we doing everything more complex? And that's what I love about the barefoot thing. Honestly, I do it for almost 5 years now. It's just so simple as a solution for a few problems.
Hmm.
At least for me, like going to parks or forests or beaches, and the sound.
Yeah.
It just makes the body more balanced, like the soul. You feel a little bit more connected to the earth, which funny enough, it makes you a little bit more balanced and calm, which makes your life better. Your relationships are a little bit probably better. You don't react
Hmm.
as like an asshole, and many things are solved just going barefoot.
Yeah.
At least in my life. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to understand. Are we making with technology? Are we making our life a little bit more complex? What do you think about that? Last question. This is the last.
Well, let's just we could schedule a part two, and we'll talk all about the feet and sprinting and barefoot. That was the whole thing we came out of sprinting. So like,
Well,
I'd
yeah,
love to get to that.
but you're a
Seriously,
philosopher, man.
yeah, maybe one day the barefoot philosopher will be my retirement name. Yeah,
Yep.
but yeah, let's schedule that so we can get that and make sure that we cover that material.
All right.
Um, in some sense, I'll say there's an argument to be made for and against, but I'd say the probably the more strong answer is that technology has afforded us the capacity. So the true answer, in a sense, is right now we yes we have there's like a lack of appreciation for what we have, because like even though you read the news and stuff, if you literally leave all your devices inside and go sit outside in your backyard or go to a park, the sun is shining, birds are chirping. It's like all of that stuff doesn't exist. As Dave Chappelle said, Twitter isn't a real place, right? So we have the ability to disconnect from that at any point in time. So even though things feel overwhelming and feel like there's always something going on, just taking your shoes off and going and being present somewhere, like you can immediately pull yourself right out of that whole thing. So in some capacity, it's not more complex because we can immediately just unplug from the matrix. The hard part is remembering that. However, the argument for the complexity is simply that like there's a lot more there's a lot more information to process and flow. That doesn't necessarily mean there's more important information. It just means that there's more noise. I think there's more noise now than ever, simply because of how much access we have. But I don't think so. The question is, are things more complex? Would say, is there more signal that we have to figure out, or is it just more noise? I think there's the same exact amount of signal coming through that your grandparents had, like what's important, but we just have a lot more noise that we have to do. So if you misunderstand that, you could start to look and say, "There's so much stuff I have to deal with." It's like, no, there's only this you have to deal with, and that's the same exact thread of truth that our parents, our grandparents, every human before is like, what is health? How do I maintain my health? How do I find a happy relationship with my loved ones? And how do I create some meaningful existence? Like that's the only thing that matters for us. We just have a whole lot more access to what seems like it could be important. So the skill is just siphoning that down to like, nope, just getting back to that essential thread. So life is not more complex. It just has the appearance of potentially looking like it's more complex. And I think that's the hard part. But the other part of that is that like we do so there is growth available through challenge. And I'm not quite sure if there's another way around it. So the question you ask, the undertone is, my grandparents they had this hard thing, and here we are. Like their grandparents really had it hard, and now we have it so easy, and we're complaining about it. The undertone is not like, we have it too good. Things should go back, and that you see that in a lot of like not specific your question, but a lot of this like anti-humanist kind of like very Green Party narrative of like, oh, it's been too good for we have it too good. We don't take it for great. It's like that kind of thing. It's like it's the same thing that's like with people and parents are like a kid's being too happy and loud. It's like, oh, it's like there's this like constraining on human like happiness, like being able to really feel and enjoy things. And so in some sense, this is like like remnants of the Puritan ethic. It's like, oh, you should, having too much pleasure, having too much fun is a bad thing. We should constrain that. And so there's a little bit of an undertone with that line of thinking, meaning you know, but there is a lot of wisdom to that, which is if you only experience the positive pleasures of something without the sacrifice required to get it, A, you don't fully appreciate it, B, you don't fully experience the pleasure, and C, what you end up I think that there's an exchange you're making an experience a spiritual exchange that has a negative impact on your capacity for self-worth and what you think you're capable of because there's no fruit of your labor because you're only having the fruit. And you can make an analogy for people that are overweight. It's like they're eating only the fruit, but not the labor to go with it. And I think there's wisdom there too. So in some capacity, I think the appropriate term is to say the real thing is to bifurcate your whole question is there's more noise, same amount of signal. So life is not more complex. It just has the appearance of being so the wisdom of having challenge and difficulty in life is valuable, but that doesn't necessarily mean we always have to glorify the ancestral ways. Like I would never wish anybody to starve for 3 days. But ironically, we do that now. It's called fasting for like, you know, it's a joke. But I would never wish someone that like couldn't didn't have food was like living on the ground for days on end. It's like okay, let's we do that. But the question is, how do we take? Let's just say if we want to make the analogy of moving upwards, but like we have a step up. So technology is affording us step ups but the problem is, once we've been removed from this immediate need for like, I have to have food, it's easy to rest in, well, I don't need to do anything. It's like that's like always been the downfall of civilization in some capacity. So people will actually, people will leave cities and go join these tribes and like kind of return because it does. So this is a bigger concept. I'm trying to explain it poorly there's like the first way of living, which you could say is like, all right, I just need food, water, people around me. There's like this kind of glorification in the ancestral time where everything was in a tribe. It was always nice. We had it wasn't like there wasn't this complexity. And it's the good old days. You see it. Everybody talks about the good old days. It's like, oh, the good old days. Go back to those. Like that's kind of this like longing for it, so to speak. But I think that there's a loss of future potential, meaning those are the people who become Luddites, like, and not to say the Amish aren't doing it right in some capacity, cutting out technology and just like focusing on this community and building and like, very grounded things. There's a lot of value and beauty in that. I wonder though, in a question is like the hard things are how do you live in the world with technology, use technology to afford you greater leverage on life while still voluntarily choosing challenge. So you could make the argument that with technology comes a greater difficulty, perceived difficulty to create challenge in your life because I think that might have happened naturally when you just need to go get food. But I think that the technology offers you a greater personal development. So that's actually interesting. I'm going to sit with that for a second. Like when you have to do something that you have to do, you grow because you did it, but you don't get the same level of spiritual inner growth because like, I had to get food. Oh, I still went through the process of having to go out, do the hard thing, risk my life, whatever. So there's still growth. There's still happiness. There's still some of this, but like there's a less. I think the proportion of growth happens between like your self. Like I didn't have to do this, and yet I still did it. In a sense, and I think there's still something with like childhood. Like you don't have to have kids, but by doing it, is a very challenging thing, and you grow because of it. So you could make the argument that as technology goes and the leverage, like I can drive and cover more space now in a day than someone else could have done in a year, or whatever, several months. Um, and you could almost make the argument that with technology, decreasing the things that you have to do, it increases the things that you get to do. And by doing the hard things that you get to do for the love of doing those, there's almost a greater level of like spiritual awareness that is available from that construct that then could poise as a more meaningful development of this human essence if we want to agree that that exists. So I don't know. There's no answers, obviously, but I think that those are the variables I would play with.
Hmm.
I don't
Very
know if that makes
interesting.
sense at all.
Yeah, very interesting about the thing you say. Of course, if you have to do something, can you really be more spiritual with it? Can you really, when you overcome it, can you gain the same benefits? If you can say benefits, um, yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. Very great, a great analogy you did there. Thank you. I think about it for the next time. I might have an answer about it, or
Please
at
do,
least
because
my answer about it, because there is no probably super answer.
but
Uh,
that's the thing. There
yeah.
might be here's if there very well could be an answer, but we just don't have the perspective to be able to understand it. And I don't think that's the thing that won't change. Whether or not there is an answer, sometimes you can stumble onto a truth and get like an intuitive knowing, like a GNOW knowing that, like, yeah, that seems really right. But the hubris to say that is right, that's where we reach because it's like it might very well be the absolute truth and stumble across the meaning of the universe. But
Hmm.
we can't know, therefore we should live in the humility that we don't know and say, I'm gonna live as though this is true with the ability to say I don't know. And if I get confronted with a greater truth, I'm gonna change. So I think that's the push firmly with an open hand. And every time you get to what seems to be a meaningful self-identified truth, you live firmly with that. And the further every day you go, like let's say day one of testing, in the same way, if you figure out I want to go lift weights, day one you can do a certain amount. Day 1,000, you're going to be able to do a lot more because your body's got a lot stronger in that conviction that you're going to do this thing.
Hmm.
Same thing with that, you have a belief, so to speak. You still understand it's still a belief, meaning you still hold it as not a statement of truth after day 1,000, but after 1,000 days of testing it, it's become stronger. So I like this is the thing is I can't stop seeing parallels between the physical development of our body and at, and like the spiritual things that seem to accompany success. And then the more I just spend time in this kind of creative exploration phase, I start to expand that to things like, the sensation, electron transfer, eyesight, your massage, fascia, like, and you start to just see these parallels of more and more stuff. It's like it just seems like this body we're in it might just be the greatest gift of all of evolution, so to speak, like everything that's come forth in the culmination of this like process of creation, so to speak. And it's it's ours to learn how to use it. Some people think about this last night. Some people drive a, I don't know, a Honda Civic or whatever, like a very low car. They just get in there, drive, and then get out. And then some people go, "Wow, what else is available with this thing?" And then they drive a Formula One car, and it's like they're both cars, but somebody that really wanted to figure out how to do that thing, it's like it's amazing. I think that you just see parallels with that over and over again. I don't see why that's any. I think that some people like cars, some people like pottery, some people like music, but we all have bodies, and I think that's the thing is like
Yeah.
any development that comes as like a meaningful spiritual development. I just don't think that there's. I don't think you can short circuit that without like learning through your body and unpackaging and packaging. It's like it just seems like this amazing thing we live in. It's so cool.
That was an epic epilogue, epic epilogos, as we say in Greece. Um, so wow, man, we can actually make just a playlist with you and just let you be and let you be. That's your
It's
flow.
nice when you have good questions that guide me.
I did nothing, man. I'm here. I'm just here. I'm just here. I think the audience will be very, very, very interested in what you say. And the thing I appreciate about our today's conversation is that you actually have some original views. And yes, I'm guessing you have some mentors, and yes, probably they influenced you a bit. As I have a few very
Hmm.
interesting people the past year. But I like the way you present and philosophize about things. And I think when we mention, or you, I don't remember who, we mentioned whatever daydreaming at the beginning. I think at the beginning, and it's
Hmm.
something I never lost. Uh, I want to bring it more because as a child I had tremendous imagination and
Hmm.
interest about life, and I think it's part of the deal. You have to
Hmm.
be interested about life, about people, about things, about the thing you said about the vision.
Hmm.
Exactly, you nailed it, and that's what I think, and that's a point. Um, I know you have a lot of things to say more, but I'll hold you there. And there's a part two, probably a part three with you. But dude, write that book, okay? Uh,
I'm working on it. That's how I put any constraints on this. Otherwise, it's just kind of like a lot of thoughts, and so like the ability
yeah,
to nail it down to some meaningful, tangible words like that helps me conceptualize, construct something of a narrative.
yeah.
So, but please, we'll schedule do a more tangible one on that because the sprinting, I think there's a lot to be learned there with sprinting
Yeah.
and with feed and just connection. So we'll do a next part soon.
Yeah, let's schedule it. All right. Where, I mean, I know it's kind of a tiring question, probably boring, but where can people find you? And when is the
Yeah.
book going to be ready, if you have any date?
I've got this is let's say it'll be it's I've got it written. There's a few chapters I'm reworking on the front end just because I started to get a better vision for it and you just learn more. Like that, it's just a little thing. So, I think the summer, like it'll be a towards the end of the summer, will be like a published, be ready out if not sooner. But like that's my top priority right now, getting that thing done. So I don't know. It's just it's cool because conversations like this continue to inform that. But at some point, you have to be like, all right, this is what I'm putting out. This is where we're going. So the summer is summer 2023 is the goal date. You know, I don't know how long the publishing process takes, but the book will be done by then.
It's fun that you say so. One of my mentors here in Greece, a fellow American of yours,
Mm,
is he's trying a autobiography now, trying to finish it. Very
mm,
interesting guy. If you come to Greece at some point, I'll hook you up. Probably I can connect you from the media. And he's
yeah,
we try to find a way to finish his book and find publishers and all that stuff. So
I'm
I
pretty sure
think
the
it's
only way to
probably
finish.
laborious. Yeah.
I think the only way to finish the autobiography is to die. So I don't know if he wants to finish it yet. That always struck me as funny. When people write one. It's like, you're not dead yet. How do you write a whatever? But yeah, no one asked me.
Yeah, it's hard. And where, of course, I mean, yeah,
Oh,
I'll put the links down below. I mean, yeah, at this
it's
point, yeah.
everywhere: YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. The Barefoot Sprinter, all one word, and Berefoot. And then GrahamTuttle.com. If you want to engage in some of the programs to reconnect and learn your body, this is where it all starts. So, but we'll talk more about that next time. Be good.
Awesome.
All right,
Graham,
brother. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
yes, me too. Very interesting conversation. Can you stay for 60 seconds after the recording?
Of course.
All right. For everybody else, please like if you like the interview, and inform us with our views, with your views, of course, about everything Graham and I shared about this in this interview. So, ciao, ciao, everybody. See you in the next part two. Bye bye.
Excellent.
Yeah.